By the early 1950s, America's schoolyards were bursting at the seams. The post-war baby boom had filled classrooms, and districts from Los Angeles to Phoenix needed buses that could carry more children, travel farther, and do it more safely than ever before. Most school buses of the day were little more than truck frames with yellow bodies bolted on top, serviceable but hardly built for the long hauls or crowded freeways of a growing West Coast. In Southern California, one company believed the answer lay in building something very different. Crown Coach Corporation, already known for its all-steel transit designs, set out to craft a school bus that didn't just meet minimum requirements, but redefined them. The idea was simple, but radical for its time. Build a bus like a motorcoach, stronger, roomier, designed to last decades instead of just years. What rolled out of their Los Angeles plant would become a legend. The Crown Supercoach wasn't just another school bus. It was a machine engineered with the same pride and toughness as the great highway coaches of the era. For generations of students across the West, riding a Crown meant more than just getting to class. It meant climbing aboard the Cadillac of School Buses. What set the Crown Supercoach apart the moment you saw it was its presence. Most school buses of the 1950s still carried the boxy silhouette of a truck, but the Crown stood tall and purposeful, like a highway coach dressed in yellow. Its high roofline gave students more headroom, and its wide windows poured sunlight across the rows of benches. To a child climbing aboard, it felt less like a cramped ride to school and more like stepping into something built for the open road. Underneath that familiar yellow paint was an engineering philosophy few competitors dared to match. The Supercoach used a full monocoque body, meaning the strength came from the structure itself rather than a separate truck frame. It was the same principle that made Greyhound's intercity coaches durable enough to rack up millions of miles. For a school bus, it was revolutionary, safer in rollovers, sturdier against daily punishment, and built to last far longer than state regulations even required. Lengths ranged from 35 to 40 feet, with the largest models carrying up to 91 passengers. These were not just enough buses, they were overbuilt, in the best sense of the word. Districts that bought Crowns knew they weren't getting a disposable machine. They were investing in a bus that could serve generations of children, decade after decade, without losing its backbone of steel. Of course, a bus this rugged needed the muscle to match its frame. Early supercoaches left the factory with gasoline engines, but as the miles piled up and the loads grew heavier, Crown turned to diesel power. By the mid-1950s, most were running Detroit diesel two-stroke engines, the famous 671 and later the larger 8V71. Their unmistakable growl echoed through neighborhoods every morning, a sound that former students can still recall like it was yesterday. To a child waiting at the curb, that high-pitched whine and deep rumble meant the Supercoach was coming. Crown offered both mid-engine and rear-engine layouts, each designed to balance power with serviceability. Behind the wheel, drivers worked with heavy-duty manual transmissions. Fuller and Spicer 5 speeds were common, though some later models adopted Allison automatics, making the big bus easier to handle in traffic. Whatever the setup, these machines were built to take punishment. Steep grades, long freeway stretches, stop-and-go city routes. But all that strength came at a price. Detroit diesels were reliable and nearly indestructible, yet they were thirsty. A Supercoach often returned only 6 to 8 miles per gallon, a figure districts tolerated because they knew the bus itself would last for decades. Mechanics also learned quickly that servicing a monocoque Crown was no small task. Special parts and expertise were often required. Still, for schools willing to invest, these buses repaid the cost in longevity, running year after year with the kind of endurance that made them legendary on the West Coast. For countless children across the West, the Crown Supercoach was more than a ride to school. It was part of the daily rhythm of growing up. Its sheer size made it impossible to ignore. Standing at the curb, A line of yellow Crowns looked more like a fleet of highway coaches than ordinary school buses. Parents trusted them because of their reputation for safety, and drivers often spoke of them with pride, knowing they were at the wheel of the toughest machine on the road. Districts in California, Nevada, Arizona, and Washington embraced the Supercoach as the gold standard. Some models carried as many as 91 students, easing the burden on schools during the peak of the baby boom. Crown's all-steel body offered peace of mind. Accidents that might have crippled lighter buses often left a Supercoach battered but still rolling. For administrators, that durability translated into decades of service. There are documented cases of Crowns operating reliably for 30 or even 40 years, nearly double the expected lifespan of a typical school bus. But the very qualities that made it legendary also limited its reach. Supercoaches were expensive, costing far more than Bluebird or Wayne models built on truck frames. Smaller districts, especially those in rural or less affluent states, simply couldn't justify the investment. As a result, the Crown became a regional icon, ubiquitous in the West, nearly invisible east of the Rockies. Yet for those who rode them daily, the Crown Supercoach left a lasting imprint. The sound of a Detroit diesel firing up in the morning, the sunlight streaming through tall windows, the sense of safety in that steel cocoon, all became memories stitched into the fabric of American school life. The Supercoach's strength and versatility meant it was never confined strictly to hauling children. In its early years, Crown marketed versions of the bus as inner-city coaches and charter vehicles. Painted in white, silver, or company colors instead of school bus yellow, these machines carried passengers on regional trips, field excursions, and even athletic team tours. With their tall stance and roomy interiors, they offered a comfort level far beyond the average school bus of the era. As time went on and districts began retiring older Crowns, a second life often awaited them. Families converted them into motorhomes, drawn by the rugged monocoque frame and dependable Detroit diesel power plants. A used Crown, stripped of its rows of benches, became the backbone for campers that could crisscross the continent. To this day, you'll still find vintage Supercoaches lovingly restored as rolling homes on wheels. Their yellow paint replaced with custom designs, but their soul unchanged. Still, the high cost that kept Crowns rare in the schoolyard also limited their appeal in commercial service. Competing bus builders offered cheaper, lighter models that fleets could buy in bulk. In the end, the Supercoach remained a niche choice outside education, admired, but never a nationwide staple. No legend exists in a vacuum, and the Crown Supercoach had its share of rivals. On the West Coast, its closest competitor was the Gillig Transit Coach, another heavy-duty monocoque school bus. Gillig's design shared many of the same virtues: strength, durability, and a lifespan measured in decades. Some districts swore by Crowns, others by Gillig's, and the rivalry often came down to loyalty as much as engineering. Both brands built buses that outclassed anything else on the road. Farther east, however, a very different story played out. Bluebird, Thomas, and Wayne dominated the market with buses built on truck chassis. They lacked the monocoque's steel backbone, but made up for it in price and accessibility. For many districts, the choice was obvious. Buy 3 Bluebirds for the cost of a single Crown. Parts were easier to source, maintenance could be done by local mechanics, and the buses still served their purpose, even if they rarely lasted more than 15 to 20 years. This contrast defined Crown's place in history. It wasn't meant to be cheap or easy. It was meant to be the Cadillac, a bus built to a higher standard, regardless of cost. That made it beloved where it ran, but invisible in regions where practicality outweighed pride. In the end, Crown and Gillig carved out reputations as West Coast royalty, while Bluebird and its peers became the workhorses for the rest of America. Today, the Crown Supercoach holds a special place in memory. For those who grew up in California, Nevada, or Arizona, it was the bus they trusted every morning and the machine that seemed indestructible. Many are still around, preserved by collectors or repurposed into motorhomes. At vintage bus shows on the West Coast, a polished Crown with its tall windows and gleaming steel body can still draw a crowd of admirers. Its legacy is easy to see, durability beyond compare. Districts that invested in Crowns often kept them in service for 30 or 40 years, far longer than any state required. Students graduated, teachers retired, even entire campuses changed hands. Yet the same yellow Crown would keep rolling decade after decade. To many, that endurance is proof that it truly was the Cadillac of school buses. Yet perfection on paper came with flaws in practice. The very strength that made it legendary also made it costly. Crowns were priced well above ordinary school buses, and their heavy-duty Detroit diesels consumed fuel at a rate of 6 to 8 miles per gallon. Mechanics often faced challenges sourcing parts or repairing the monocoque frame, which required specialized knowledge. These hurdles made the bus impractical for districts with tight budgets or small fleets. Because of this, the Supercoach never became a nationwide icon. East of the Rockies, most children never saw one, and the names Bluebird or Thomas defined the school bus experience instead. In a sense, Crown's uncompromising vision was both its greatest triumph and its undoing. It built a bus too good, too strong, and too expensive for the broader market, ensuring that its legacy would remain regional, yet cherished by those who knew it. The Crown Supercoach was never a bus for everyone. It was heavy, costly, and far from practical for many districts, yet those very qualities are what made it unforgettable. Where others saw a simple school bus, Crown built a machine that carried children with the same pride and toughness as an intercity coach. It stood as a symbol of safety, strength, and longevity. Values parents and communities cherished. Decades later, the sight of a Crown still stirs memories. The high roofline, the tall windows, the unmistakable song of a Detroit diesel, all remind us of a time when craftsmanship mattered more than cost. It wasn't perfect, but maybe that's why it remains so loved. How about you? Do you remember riding a Crown Supercoach to school or hearing that diesel roar outside your house? Share your stories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys through America's bus history.